Somewhere under an unbroken sheet of grass, the most feared man on earth lies utterly hidden. His armies razed cities, his name remade maps. And yet his grave is the one city no one has ever found. Why would a conqueror who tolerated no walls build the final wall around himself? And what do the few scattered voices of history whisper about the greatest secret burial ever attempted? Stay with me, because by the end of this story you'll know what the sources say, what the satellites have seen, and why the mountain might be keeping its silence. He died on campaign far from home. It was Etienne Urbig Architi. The Western Xia were collapsing under relentless pressure. The steppe's iron wind had blown into their valleys, and Genghis Khan, Temujin, had come to finish what he started. The official chronicles do not linger on how he died. They rarely spare him that kind of intimacy. But the rumors do. One says he fell from his horse, the instrument of his life becoming the instrument of his death. Another, darker, tells of a wound, an arrow, perhaps loosed by a captured princess bent on revenge. We don't know. What we do know is that it happened in the heat of conquest, and the man who had remapped the world issued his last command: bury me, where no one will ever find me. Why such fierce secrecy? Why the need to disappear? Steppe tradition gives one answer. On the grasslands, graves were not monuments, they were doors. A marked tomb invited rivals, curses, desecration. To keep the soul safe, you hid the door. Another answer is political. A conqueror with enemies on every horizon could not risk his body becoming a banner for those who hated him, or even for those who loved him too much. A grave can become a shrine, and shrines can become rallying points. Better, perhaps, for the empire that outlived him to worship an idea than a place. And so the last march began. Chroniclers tell us that his body was carried north, away from the burned fields and scorched cities, back to the cold air and pine shadow of his birthplace. The caravan moved day and night, an arrow drawn taut across the steppe, scattering silence in its wake. The story goes that any traveler they met along the road was silenced. No witnesses, no rumors. When they reached the sacred mountains of Khentii, his mountains, the procession slowed. The riders dismounted. The wind took over as the only sound. Some say they chose a slope of Burkhan Khaldun, the mountain he had loved since he was a terrified boy hiding from enemies in its ravines. Others say a valley nearby. One account swears they diverted a river to flood the grave, then returned its waters to their bed, letting the current erase every sign. Another, colder still, says 10,000 horses were driven back and forth over the earth, until the ground looked as if no hand had touched it. When it was done, the gravemakers were killed. When the killers returned to camp, they too were killed. The last secret sealed itself, that's the legend. Then the empire institutionalized that silence. A forbidden zone was born, Ikh Khorig, the great taboo. Imagine an area of mountains and forests, cut off from the world for centuries, where the loyalty of men becomes geography. It stretched across the high folds of the Khentii, a living wall of pines and ridges. No commoner entered. No map named it. A caste of hereditary guardians, the Dark had, policed its borders. Their oath? To keep outsiders away, to tend to the unseen, to watch over the invisible house of their clans. They had privileges and responsibilities handed down like heirlooms. They knew the mountain trails and the smell of the rains, and they did not talk. Even Mongols spoke of Ikh Khorig in hushed voices. The mountain was sacred, yes, but it was also a vault with no doors. This is where the past starts whispering theories. The Khentii Mountains have always been the heart of the story. This is where the boy Temujin became the man. For me, where he learned hunger and mercy and the cold logic of the steppe. When he and his mother, Hu Elun, were abandoned, the mountain fed them. When the Taichud captured him and clamped the wooden kange around his neck, he escaped into its ravines and swore to remember the ground that had hidden him. As Khan, he performed rituals facing Burkhan Khaldun at dawn, offering milk and raising his hat in reverence. He made the mountain the axis of his destiny. Many Mongols believe his bones returned to that axis, because where else would the greatest of the sons of the steppe go But back to the mountain that taught him to survive? You know, then there were the 8 White Yurts. Not everyone knows this. For centuries, there existed a cult devoted to the spirit of Genghis Khan. It wasn't a cult of bones. It was a cult of presence. The 8 White Yurts, spirit tents, carried his banners, his relics, the things that told his story in felt and wood and silk. Hereditary guardians moved them with the seasons, tended them like living things, and sang to them. They were not graves, but they were mausoleums of meaning. To the faithful, the great Khan's essence lived with those banners, not in any mound of earth. The guardians of these yurts were also said to be kin to the guardians of Ikh Khorig, twin obligations circling a single mystery. Even today, in Ordos, far from the Khentii, there is a mausoleum, a cenotaph, not a grave, that houses his spirit banners. Pilgrims come. They bow. The empty coffin is a confession and a promise the body was never here. And that is how it must be. If the White Yurts kept his spirit, who kept his body? The most famous foreign voice to speak on it was Marco Polo. Writing decades after the burial, he breathes life into the rumor with a detail only a storyteller could love. He tells of the funeral procession that killed every living thing it encountered. Men, birds, deer, until the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. He tells of treasure buried with the Khan, all the wealth a ruler would need beyond the sky. He tells of a river bent out of its path and then straightened again, hiding the grave under water as if it were an idea, not a place. Is this truth? Or the kind of truth that grows on the road as tales change hands? Rashid al Din, a Persian historian who wrote Closer to the Imperial Center, gives us the bones and few of the ligaments, burial in the homeland, in the mountains, in extreme secrecy. Neither man names a rock you can point to, but they sing the same melody, hidden, kept, washed from the map. If the past hands us whispers, the present hands us lenses. And for most of modern history, the Khentii's great taboo remained just that. A silence even governments were reluctant to disturb. After Mongolia's first century revolutions, the area around Burkhan Khaldun became a strictly protected zone. Khentii strictly protected area, sacred landscape, legal sanctuary. The mountain itself was recognized by UNESCO. Excavation is not allowed, not with shovels, not with drills, not with good intentions, which means our search today is a choreography of restraint. You study the mountain without touching it. You ask questions the earth doesn't always care to answer. But technology can listen in new ways. Satellites watch the steppe from above, turning its grasses into readable maps. Remote sensing projects, one famously led by an engineer named Albert Lin, asked the world to help scan satellite images for anomalies, unnatural shapes, straight lines where none should be, rectangles in a land of curves. Hundreds of thousands of digital eyes combed the Khentii for signatures of the human hand. And they found things, oh yes. In the folds east of Burkhan Khaldun, faint geometries emerged. Rectangular earthworks half swallowed by time, low walls peeking out of tundra. What looked like roads radiating from nowhere to nowhere. Perhaps the remains of an ordu, a royal camp whose bones had hardened into soil. Circles of stones, some Bronze Age, some later, dotted the valleys like constellations fallen to earth. Near Avraga, believed to be one of Genghis' bases, ground-penetrating radar sniffed at the dirt and found hints of buried floors, hearths, and enclosures. The archaeology of life, not death. So why not just dig wherever the images said something slept? Because the mountain says no. Because Mongolian law says no. Because governments and monks and elders and herders say no. And because you can learn a great deal without breaking the skin. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometers, LiDAR, these are the tools of a new kind of respect. In some places, the radar returns a sudden darkness in the soil, a sign of stone where there should be none, or wood where only root should be, a shadow that could be a chamber. In others, the instruments trace straight lines under grass, walls beneath the green. The steppe is full of these old skeletons. Most belong to people far older than the Mongols, the Bronze Age builders of Khorigs and deer stones. The mountain keeps their secrets too. Sorting Mongol-era structures from the rest is like listening to a choir and trying to hear one favorite voice. Now and then someone thinks they've heard it. There have been claims, breathless, confident of the tomb found. A hill here, a mound there, a valley with an unusual silence. But claims without proof are only stories dressed in armor, and in the Khentii, the proof cannot be taken, only offered. The guardians of the landscape haven't offered it, the law hasn't offered it. The mountain hasn't changed its mind, and yet the hunt continues, not as a sprint but as a vigil. Teams go in with monks and rangers. They pray facing the wind. They record without piercing. They catalog mounds, mark alignments, study the age of larch trees whose roots hold old secrets. They compare satellite passes across seasons, watching as snow outlines shapes that grass disguises. They listen to elders whose grandfathers' grandfathers carried whispers the way hunters carry water. You begin to understand that this isn't just a map exercise. It's diplomacy with the dead. Why hasn't it been found? Beyond the obvious answer, because it was designed never to be, there's the wild scale of the task. The Khentii is not a backyard, it is a country of mountains. Its forests hide places even deer don't stray. Its valleys are quilted with hundreds, maybe thousands, of burial mounds from eras stacked like parchment. The grave you seek might be no larger than a shepherd's tomb, indistinguishable from the many unless you know the exact slope, the exact stone. If a river was truly diverted, the grave might lie under silt, under a current that has changed its path 3 times since. If horses flattened the ground, the scar has long since healed. Time is an artist with excellent hands. There is another reason, ethics. Modern archaeology is learning a new kind of conscience. We can no longer automatically means we should. In Mongolia, guardianship of the sacred landscape is living, not academic. Ask a herder whose family learned the mountain's songs, and they'll tell you plainly, a burial place is not a puzzle, it's a covenant. Disturbing it would be a violation, an intrusion on what is sacred. Many visitors, even those driven by pure curiosity, have begun to see that when knowledge requires breaking something precious, restraint can be the more honorable choice. The law protects that principle, and so do the people who live with the mountain every day. And then there's the old hard whisper that follows all tombs, a curse. We should be careful here. Curses are the language of anxiety, not history. What's true is that humanity has always felt the weight of disturbing the dead. The story of Tamerlane's tomb, opened on the eve of war, disaster following, haunts many minds. Older still is the Egyptian warning. Scribbled in falcon wings and ibis feet, death comes on swift wings to those who disturb the king. Among Mongols, the version is simpler. You do not anger the mountain. You do not pull a door off a house if you don't know who lives inside. Whether you believe in curses or not, you must believe in consequences. Once you cross a line, you cannot uncross it. And what would be lost if we won? Because what if the tomb were found? Imagine it. A small chamber beneath the roots of larch and birch, a body in leather and silk, weapons black with age, a bow unstrung, a quiver's last sigh. Maybe, if the stories of treasure have any truth, a fork of gold, a plate beaten so thin it's more light than metal. Perhaps the white standards, the horsehair banners that marched with him through a continent, reduced to dust. Perhaps nothing but bones and a ring. Science would have a feast. DNA could speak where chronicles refuse. We might learn his ancestry, more precisely map his sons and the sons of their sons. Forensic analysis might read the story of old wounds from his skeleton, hint at the cause of death. The archaeologists would tell us what funerary rites the Mongols, so stingy with writing and so lavish with conquest, gave to their greatest son. Historians would rewrite chapters. Museums would shine lights behind glass, but then hear the other story. The site would become a shrine whether anyone admitted it or not. Pilgrims, tourists, cameras, fences, copies of copies, guards, then guards. For the guards, the mountain would change forever. Mountain, the secret that belonged to a people, would become a global headline. The great Khan, who chose to be unknown in death, would be harvested, argued over, analyzed until even the silence in his grave had nowhere to rest. Is that what he asked for with his last command? So will it ever be found? The only honest answer is the most unsatisfying one: we do not know. The tools get better every year. RISP speeder. Satellites pierce cloud, radars see what eyes cannot. The mountain is a little less alone with each pass. And yet the keepers of the mountain have a voice, and it is strong. They have laws, and those laws mean something. If a discovery comes, it may come like the steppe's sudden weather, a washout that reveals a stone, a landslide that peels back a layer of earth, a tree uprooted by wind that points to what lay beneath. It may be the mountain itself that does the telling, or it may choose to hold its own counsel for another 800 years. Consider the man at the center of this silence. He was not a god, but he was treated like one in the imagination of his enemies and his heirs. He believed in the eternal blue sky and in the cold arithmetic of power. He was capable of mercy and of mercilessness. He was a father, a husband, a rival, a strategist. He bowed to a mountain. He wanted his grave to disappear. That desire is perhaps the last wish we can meet. The secret of his tomb is not just a riddle to solve, it is a mirror held up to our hunger to know. Do we respect the unknown because it protects something fragile? Or do we pursue the unknown because we trust ourselves to hold what we find without breaking it? Listen to the wind that combs the grass on a Khentii ridge. It's the same wind that dried sweat on the brows of the riders who carried him home. It's the same wind that flutters the silk at the spirit shrine in Ordos. It's the same wind that pushes at the corners of our curiosity. Somewhere in that sound is a lesson. Empires rise on the backs of horses and fall at the edges of maps. But the last fortress of Genghis Khan is not a city or a wall or a river he conquered. It is a silence he created, and a mountain that agreed to keep it. Perhaps the greatest monument he ever built is one you can't see. Perhaps the steppe itself is his tomb. If the day comes when the earth chooses to tell us, we should be ready to listen with reverence. Until then, remember, not every secret is a challenge. Some are a kind of grace. And sometimes, the truest way to honor the past is to let the grass grow back and leave the door unknocked.